And here we are with Dr. Shaun Wyche with Metropolitan State University, and he's going to tell us today about the implications of the Brexit. So Dr. Wyche, welcome back to North Star Oasis. And what is Brexit in the first place?
Brexit refers to the United Kingdom referendum held on its European Union membership this past Thursday. And on the ballot, voters in the country were asked whether or not they wanted to stay in the European Union or not. And by a 52 to 48% margin, they voted to leave, being the first country to leave the European Union.
So how many countries are in the European Union?
28 currently.
And what implication does this have on Great Britain politically?
Well, first domestically, we've already seen the political fallout, and that's with the announcement of the resignation of Prime Minister David Cameron of the Conservative Party. And a little background context was that over the past 25 years, the one issue that's divided the Conservative Party the most has been that of the European Union. And the Prime Minister was on the side of staying in the European Union, while many others in his party were against. And it was basically also seen as a referendum on his post as Prime Minister.
So who does it look like is going to replace David Cameron as the Prime Minister?
Right now, the two frontrunners are the former Mayor of London, who's now a current Member of Parliament named Boris Johnson, who was active in the Leave campaign. And his most likely opponent he will run off against will be current Home Secretary Theresa May, who was someone who was part of the Remain group and is a steadfast ally of David Cameron.
So what does this implication have for the European Union?
Well, right now for the European Union, not anything too concrete, because one, the United Kingdom was not ever a member of the Eurozone, which is all of the member countries that use the euro as their currency. And
so the British have always been on the pound?
They've always kept the pound. They never joined the euro, along with a few other European countries, mainly in Scandinavia, who are EU members but not members of the Eurozone.
Now, as I've been reading all the headlines, I've been hearing from the American political left, huge catastrophe, and the American political right that this has been a good thing. What's your opinion on how Americans should look at this vote for Brexit?
Well, they have to look at it very much within the context of what the whole project of European integration has meant over the past 60, 70 years or so, and Britain's place in it. Because we have to remember what got us to the point of the EU was ultimately the fallout from World War II and the need to unify Europe and prevent another world war from happening between the nations. And so what happened with the EU was it wasn't the EU at first. Ultimately, a series of treaties over the span of about 40 or 50 years led to the ultimate creation of the European Union.
So now there was this talk about Scotland breaking away from the United Kingdom. Is there any possibility of that re-emerging?
Well, for starters, we have to remember that Scotland voted to remain in the United Kingdom. Just if you look at Scotland itself versus other parts of the country. And the reason why there's so much talk about it is because the First Minister of Scotland, who would be analogous to being the governor, so to speak, of Scotland, the leader of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, she has said that if Scotland voted yes and Britain left, then there would be another independence referendum, because Sturgeon's a member of the Scottish National Party, which is of course pro-independence, and one of their main planks for years has been to have for Scotland to be a full independent member of the European Union. So they see the EU as a vessel for recognizing its statehood. And as far as the independence referendum happening, the Sturgeon government in Edinburgh does have the votes for another referendum, combined with her party, the SNP, and the Scottish Green Party, who they have very pretty close relations with because they're another pro-independence party. So
now let's bring this discussion closer to American shores with Quebec. They had a similar referendum just a few years ago. Has there been any talk about Quebec taking inspiration from this and redoing their referendum to seek independence?
Well, the sovereignty movement right now is in tatters in Quebec. If you look within Canadian politics, the high points of Quebec nationalism came about in the early 90s as a result of a series of failed constitutional amendments to the Canadian Constitution, where Quebec didn't want to go along, and so then that led to a rise in nationalist sentiment. And since then, we have seen the main parties at the party that's advocated for Quebec independence just be withered off the political scene.
So it's safe to say that Quebec probably isn't going to do anything. Scotland may do something, and then we're going to see the long-term implications as time goes on.
Yeah, so federalism in Quebec, which is the term they use for people who want to stay a part of Canada, is alive and well right now.
Okay, and then does it look like there's going to be any other EU member countries deciding to go with their own?
Right now, that's difficult to say. Like I said, Britain's the first country to leave this project. And we hear talks and rumblings from other countries' leaders. And we tend to see this from leaders on the right, nationalistic leaders such as Marine Le Pen from the National Front in France, who's currently leading in the first round polls of next year's French presidential election, saying that France should leave too. And then you have Geert Wilders from the Party for Freedom in the Netherlands, who also would want the Netherlands to leave. And we're seeing all of these anti-establishment movements just grow in Europe. Like for today, in instance, Spain's having an election, and there's a left-wing anti-establishment party called Podemos that's going to end up finishing second. And we saw last weekend in Rome elected their first female mayor, who is from a party, anti-establishment, anti-EU party that's led by an Italian comedian.
Wow. So now, back in 1860, we kind of tried that with disunion in the United States, and it led to 4 years of a civil war. Is there any threat of civil war looming in Europe based upon the political movements over there?
No, the only civil war you're going to see is out there in the streets of Marseille with the fans rioting during Euro 2016. But
so
no.
It's all European football.
Yes.
So and then economically, I know that economics is not your strongest suit, but what do you know economically that we can gather from this longer term, and how the EU is going to manage this here on out?
Well, right now, what this means immediately for the EU, you have to understand how the European Union operates. The European Union was born out of originally the European coal and steel community in the early 1950s, which led to the Treaty of Rome, which created the European Economic Community, or European Community for short, which created a single customs union and free trade area for its members. And its membership has enlarged since then. First it was just Germany, France, the Benelux nations, Italy, but as the years have gone by, more countries have joined. Britain didn't join the European community until 1972,
wow,
for instance. And more and more countries started joining when Franco left Spain. Spain became democratic again. They joined. Same with Portugal after the Coronation Revolution. And so in the early 90s, the European community, which after the Maastricht Treaty in 92, it became the European Union, was seen as a Western European customs union. What happened though in 2005 is really, well, of course the euro was started in 1999, which was the single European currency. And in 2005, the biggest enlargement of the EU happened, where the EU doubled in membership. It went up to 25 members, taking in countries from the former Eastern Bloc. And it's since that moment we have seen this rise in Euroscepticism be even more fervent because of the European Union's principles as being, since it is a single market, It relies on the principles of the free movement of capital, goods, and labor. And so the EU allows for citizens of any EU nation to move to any country, as provided that they're going to that country looking for work. And so we've seen that, especially after the 2005 enlargement of the EU, where we have seen a lot of people come from Eastern Europe over to places in countries of Western Europe, especially Britain, and are living there. For instance, Polish is now the second most spoken language in England.
Really?
Yes, because there was a huge Polish influx that's come into Great Britain since Poland joined the EU.
So now let's briefly touch on the Greece economic situation. I know that that's got something to do with all of this. What can you tell me about how they're managing affairs in Greece and how that impacts the EU overall, and if there's any implications from Brexit on that situation?
There's not really any implications, because back when the bailout was happening, since Britain wasn't a member of the Eurozone, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, who's basically Britain's version of Secretary of the Treasury, George Osborne, he was able to negotiate and make sure Britain wouldn't have to pay for any of the bailouts that would have to be paid to Greece, which ultimately the bulk got paid for by Germany and France. So there won't be any implications yet. But if a Eurozone member does leave the European Union, then we start seeing some direct implications on Greece, because that gets into the issue of monetary policy versus fiscal policy.
And then the Muslim immigration patterns on the refugee from Syria. How's all that fit into this discussion?
That was figured a lot in this campaign, but the actual honest truth of all of this is that most people who immigrate into the United Kingdom actually come from outside of the European Union and not through the European Union. Most people who come through the European Union are people from mainly Eastern Europe looking for work. And so people tied the issue of Syrian refugees in Germany to them coming in to Britain, but the Syrian refugees are of course not EU citizens, so they wouldn't have the right to come there also. But also people have mentioned Turkey joining the European Union, and then if they joined, then that meant Muslims from Turkey would ultimately come into Britain. But the way things are looking now domestically in Turkey, with Turkey, at least under President Erdogan, sliding towards more authoritarian rule, membership for the EU seems less and less likely for Turkey with each day.
All right, Dr. Wyche, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Appreciate you joining us back on North Star Oasis once again.